I set an alarm to get up because I'm old now. I've been old for a while, truth be told, and I can't stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning anymore, not without copious amounts of drugs or alcohol or both. So I set an alarm. I got up at 4:30 because I agreed somewhat foolishly to do an interview immediately following the Beterbiev-Smith fight with Tunde Ajay, the trainer and manager, of course, of Anthony Yarde. So I thought it made sense to get up early enough to watch the fight as well. So I'd have something to talk about. And I missed the first 2 rounds. And so when I switched on Sky Sports' coverage, they were saying that, it was relatively even opening couple of rounds. Callum Smith had won the second in their opinion. And I thought, they're obviously feeling each other out. And then Beterbiev came out of round 3 and just put a beatdown on Callum Smith, a beatdown that didn't stop until the referee stepped in a few rounds later. And the even kind of competitive matchup I'd been led to believe didn't really play out that way. I mean, I fancy Beterbiev to win the fight. Easy to say now. Hopefully I said it on camera beforehand. But I did think Callum would give him some trouble. I thought he'd respect Callum Smith's power a lot more than he did. And from what Tunde said, because as I said, I missed the first 2 rounds, he felt that Callum Smith got a taste of Beterbiev's power from the very first shot he took in round 1. And from that point on, his tactics changed, or it seemed they changed, or his mindset changed. And he immediately went onto the back foot. And certainly from the rounds I saw, from round 3 onwards, he was predominantly on the back foot. And he threw plenty of punches, but you're not really getting full leverage on him when you're leaning back, avoiding shots at the same time and under pressure. Beterbiev, I thought, showed his technical skills are right up there with his punch power and his ferocity and his work rate, because they're the things that he usually gets credit for. But I thought his footwork was excellent. I thought his jab at creating openings and closing the distance with the jab as well was superb. And I just thought Smith didn't really have the answers. He was throwing those big kind of Hail Mary shots from quite early in the fight, those big looping left hooks, the right uppercut on the inside, just because he was being forced to. Beterbiev was forcing him to fight at a pace that Smith probably didn't intend on producing until later on in the fight. A lot of people now say, well, Smith should have gone on the front foot, pushed Beterbiev back. He's a different fighter when you push him back. I don't disagree with that notion, but I think it is much easier said than done. He's incredibly strong. He uses his footwork very well to get into position, similar to Golovkin. The only difference is Gennady Golovkin in his prime at middleweight looked like quite a slim, unthreatening, certainly out of the ring figure, whereas Beterbiev looks like a monster both inside and outside the ring. Sorry, Artur, don't come after me. But, in that ring, to keep him off is incredibly difficult. Never mind actually try and win the fight. And it makes Anthony Yarde's performance against him look all the better, I suppose, in hindsight and in comparison with Callum Smith. But I felt real sympathy for Callum in there because he tried pretty much everything he could. He went down fighting and he'll get a lot of respect for that. And he can certainly come again. But there just didn't seem to be an answer to what Beterbiev was doing. And that's when we look at his next move. We'll have to talk about what it's going to take for someone to beat him. Where are we going? Joey Abel, talking about the drug stuff, which we're going to go into detail in a minute, says, if an atypical finding isn't a failed test, why is it not breaking any confidentiality when news was broke? Eddie kept telling us how confidential Ben's failed tests were. I can't speak to the Ben issue because I don't know about the confidentiality and the atypical findings and so on. But basically, I believe an atypical finding is one that's not within the usual realms of what you would expect from someone, his age and an athlete and etc., that weight and so on. But it's not a big enough disparity to be a failed test or to be an adverse finding. There must be parameters, there must be limits. And if you go beyond those limits, it goes from atypical to adverse. And I think what they were saying was it would be a follow-up test is what's recommended in those situations. And Beterbiev was actually negative on all his follow-up tests. So that's why no action was taken. But yeah, having, even finding out in Callum Smith's kind of side of things, finding out that your opponent, who's already a formidable, intimidating guy, has had atypically high, so it's not atypically low, atypically high findings for, I think it was human growth hormone and testosterone or something along those lines. I'm not a scientist. Shock all of you, I know. But knowing that, going into the ring against someone who's already quite a scary proposition, that kind of helped Callum Smith's mindset. I suppose the flip side is that having lost the fight in the fashion he did, you can always look at that and say, well, maybe something fishy was going on and there's kind of a reason you can give yourself for why it didn't go your way. But pre-fight, that must have only added to the intimidation or apprehension that Callum Smith must have felt. Joey Abel says, were we hyping Smith too much and lost objectivity? Callum's best wins was an Old Groves, arguable win versus Ryder, and Ndam coming up in weight. The only elite fighter he'd fought before, he lost every round. Yeah, I was having a chat about this morning with Ellie Scottney, funnily enough. I know it's a name drop, but it's not, Canelo. No offense, Ellie. Please don't watch this. But she was saying, we were both saying the same thing, really, that if you look beyond the 2 defeats on Callum Smith's record, which are against Beterbiev and Canelo, his best win, it's not great. It is, I think Scotty said, against the George Groves, who was old and only had one arm, was how she put it. And then I think she brought up Rocky Fielding as one of the others. So not the guys you mentioned there. I don't think, I had him losing to Ryder, but in a close fight. And then Ndam, I think, had no business being at that weight and was past his best. But yeah, so Rocky Fielding, who did go on to win a regular version of the WBA title, I think later on. But that was a 1-round shootout. So it wasn't really, it's not something you can hang your hat on as Callum Smith's, proof of his class. He was a good amateur as well, but not, he didn't win an Olympic medal or anything like that. So, yeah, maybe we were overrating him. Maybe there was a bit of regional bias in the UK as well. But, he did go the distance with Canelo with a severely damaged bicep. He has looked impressive at European level. I just think maybe it's not so much that Callum Smith's not as good as we thought. Maybe Beterbiev just is that good. Josh, what was your reaction to the atypical findings? Not so much in light of the result, but when you heard about it 2 days or so before the fight.
I think it was an interesting one. I think people definitely took notice when that news came out. I heard some interviews with Eddie Hearn. Then I heard Bob Arum, I think, the following day make his case as well. It's something that you definitely have to take into consideration. And does it change the mindset of Callum Smith? He's obviously got the biggest fight, or one of the biggest fights of his career to prepare for. And when you bring things like that into it, is it just an extra layer of doubt, an extra layer of confusion maybe going into that first round? You've got just a few more things to think about. Did that have any effect on the fight at all? But obviously you mentioned that Beterbiev has had follow-up tests and they've come back fine. So from my point of view, I don't think there will be anything to it, but definitely with that being in the lead up to such an important fight for Callum Smith, it could have possibly played a part, but Beterbiev was the better man on the night, so there's no doubt
there. Yeah, no doubt about that at all. And John Ansell says, name one world-class performance by any of the Smith brothers, which isn't very nice. What about Bone Crusher? He wasn't bad. Ken Igbo says, now we all know that Wilder is the one ducking AJ because AJ can fight anyone. Francis reminds me of Ike Ibiabuchi, who beat David Tua. AJ by decision, Francis by knockout. Can't have both. You got to pick one or the other. Or at least when you go to the bookmakers. Actually, no, I suppose you could bet on both, couldn't you? Joe Abel again. Eddie complaining about lack of transparency, but was happy for Rivas having no idea until after he lost. Referring, of course, to the hearing that Dillian Whyte went through after his adverse findings. He went to a hearing on the morning of the fight. But yeah, Oscar Rivas and his team were not informed until after the fight. That is a fair comment, I think, there from Joey Abel. But yeah, so now we look to the future. And before we talk about Beterbiev's future, we've got to look at Callum Smith, because he has now fought arguably the two best fighters in their respective weight classes as he's moved through from 168 to 175 and come up short both times. Already a world champion, presumably earned a fair bit of money in his career as well. Eddie Hearn suggested immediately after the fight he might consider retirement. Not Eddie, Callum Smith perhaps could consider retirement. He could wait, because I was talking about this with Scottney as well this morning. He could wait for those titles to fragment, but it seems like we've been waiting for an undisputed fight between Beterbiev and Bivol, which we'll talk about in a minute, for quite some time already. So the problem is that if you wait around at 175, because I don't think Callum Smith's going back down to 168 anytime soon with his tall, wide frame, you could be waiting rather too long, and he might as well just retire. But then there's some big domestic fights out there for him perhaps as well. The winner of Buatsi Aziz, Anthony Yard. Josh, what do you think? Callum Smith, time to retire?
Yeah, you mentioned the names we've got here in the UK. It's arguably one of the best divisions in the United Kingdom, the light heavyweight division. Anthony Yarde's definitely got a big fight on the horizon. We saw he had put up a great effort in hindsight, really, against Artur Beterbiev, probably better than what we saw from CALLUM Smith the other night. So that's a possible matchup, and I think would be really intriguing for the fans out there. I'm not sure quite who I'd pick in that one. I'd probably edge towards Anthony Yarde, but it's definitely an interesting fight. And then the outcome of that Aziz Buatsi match, which is another one which I struggle to sort of make a pick on. So there's really 4 names there in the UK that are all sort of a fairly similar level, that fringe world, top European level. And if they were to fight each other, there's some fantastic fights that you could see out of that. And maybe if one of them was to emerge out of that, we could see them up against one of the big boys, whether that be Beterbiev or Bivol.